I don't know if the door behind is bad feng shui.
It's funny you say that.
I'm just trying to move over the, but I don't want to do this because there's a Magritte, is a woman naked.
Yeah, there's a mirror there. It looks great. It looks great.
Okay, good. I love the books.
I had it behind me and I shifted it.
Did you have a break at all, Chad, this summer or this fall? Any break?
No, we're going to take a little break over the holidays. We're going to, we did a lot of filming at the Bowl in August.
Yeah.
And we're just in our next period right now. So Gustavo got back to LA. He was with us from March through August. And he was here for a couple of months.
Good.
But he's been back, and they're filming on stage right now.
Good.
And, we had a little bit of rain yesterday, so we had to kind of move things around.
That must be unusual. It must be unusual to have rain.
Oh, yeah.
It's unusual in November to have rain. We just had a little bit, but it also got very cold last night. So we were down to about 50 or 55 degrees. Hey, Deborah.
Hi.
Hey there.
How are you?
How are you?
Very good.
Good.
Good to see you.
Everybody. Let me get on here.
I should have worn my white suit too because I think it's.
I was going to go all white, and then I thought it was too obvious. So
No,
I
it
thought
looks good.
just to show that it's just to show that it's a little, it's tricky right now still.
Yes.
Hey, congratulations on the wedding.
Oh, thank
Yes.
you, thank you.
It's
We had a
amazing.
great time. I didn't
God, you made it
expect-
onto
Yeah,
slip disc.
I know. It was absolutely.
Whoa.
I was just horrified. But
And Deborah, just I think we're live with everybody, including the audience now. We're just waiting for some other people to join.
Okay.
That was the message I got from our colleagues at the Dallas Symphony. So I think we're just.
I actually just got a message from our director of PR that we're live as well. So
Good.
I still congratulate you on your wedding.
thank you. I really appreciate it.
I see Marin. She's looking at her notes there. She's waving.
I'm
My phone.
Hey there.
I was going to call you, Deborah, but you're here.
No, I'm here. I'm here. It's a beautiful day in New York. It's 70 degrees and fantastic. Last night was a street party in New York City. All of New York was
Yeah.
wild. Yeah, it's wild.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We're waiting I have to look at a camera above you, and you're on the screen below, so it's going to be an effort the whole time. For sure. But anyway, we're just waiting 3 more minutes until we get more people online, and then we'll start.
Okay. Kim, I'm having a little trouble understanding you, but I don't know if that's just me.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take my mask off when I actually start speaking for real. But
Okay. You're being good. You're following protocol.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is
Much
much
better.
better.
All right. So yes, I will. I'm going to put this on for a minute, but when I start, I'll take the mask off.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine. Can I put this? Is it possible to put this up higher?
I noticed Marin is sporting all black.
Yes.
No,
I'm kind of mixed here.
I knew you were.
Oh, there.
Oh, she's in blue.
Chad, I was expecting you in all white.
Mm. Again, I thought it'd be too obvious.
Yeah. Oh, for all of us.
But and Deborah, are you in the city right now, or are you up north?
Yes, I'm on Riverside Drive.
Yep.
Just up from Lincoln Center, and everything's the city's calm. We're
Yeah.
getting our infectious disease specialist tells us we're about 2 weeks away from another lockdown.
Oh, dear.
But everybody's really good. People wear masks, they distance. Everybody's doing everything they can do.
Yeah.
But people travel to New York. It's
Yeah.
no way around it. So we're just hopeful that we can avoid it. But all of our plans for streaming and everything are now well, we're continuing, but we'll see.
Right.
And I guess in Missouri, it's pretty bad too. Yeah,
It's
Sorry?
pretty,
it's pretty bad there, isn't it, in
yeah,
Missouri?
it's pretty bad. We're still able to do live performances. So Stefan landed today, and we have 2 weeks of chamber orchestra concerts with an audience of up to 150. And
Wow.
we're like you, we work with infectious disease specialists, and they monitor this very, very closely for us.
Yeah, where ours don't let us, that's one of the interesting things about the whole pandemic is the effect and the regulations in different parts of the country are just so very different. Having been at Pandemic Central in New York, and the governor is just, he's done a great job, and people here have done a great job, but he is just, everybody is struggling not to go back to where it was, because in those days in the middle of March and April, I mean, in our apartment, it was just constant ambulances. That's all you could hear. 1,000 people a day were dying. So it's, and I think Vienna has locked down right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Germany.
we'll see what happens. It's an unknown route.
It is.
Sure.
Okay, hi. Hi, Chad.
Maren, are we seeing you wave?
I'm waving to you.
Oh, hey, how are you?
We're waving back.
But nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. Very good to see you.
All right, well, we're ready to start. Are you all ready?
Yes.
Sure.
As ready as I can be.
All right, well, welcome and thank you all for being part of our second annual Women in Classical Music Symposium. Whether you're joining us here in Dallas, we do have a room of about 30 people here with us, socially distanced, or if you're joining online from elsewhere in the world. My name is Kim Noltme. I'm the Ross Perot President and CEO of the Dallas Symphony Association, and I will be moderating today's session. We're proud to host this important conference, and we're looking forward to hearing insights and ideas that will be shared over the next few days. Our first session is entitled The 21st Century Orchestra. We thought it would be wonderful to start our conference hearing from orchestra leaders about what is happening broadly in the industry, perspectives of women in leadership roles, and of course, we will discuss the impact of COVID-19. Thank you to the sponsors for their support of the event. The symposium is sponsored by Billingsley Company, with additional support provided by the Texas Commission on the Arts, Texas Women's Foundation, Nancy Bierman, Joanne Bober, Jan Jordan, and Martha Wells. The DSO also thanks Capital One and the Eugene McDermott Foundation for their investment in the organization's Women in Classical Music programs. Now I'll do a brief introduction of our panelists. First, we have conductor Maren Alsop with us today. Maren is the chief conductor of the Vienna Radio Symphony Orchestra, the first music director of Maryland's National Orchestra Institute, chief conductor and curator of the Ravinia Festival, conductor of honor at the Sao Paulo Symphony Orchestra, and music director of the Baltimore Symphony for the past 14 years, where she founded the incredible Orc Kids program. She's received many awards over her career, including the World Economic Forum Crystal Award, multiple Gramophone Awards, and a MacArthur Fellowship Award. She founded the Taki Concordia Conducting Fellowship, which was recently renamed the Taki Alsop Conducting Fellowship in her honor. We're thrilled to have her in Dallas for the past week, conducting 4 concerts with guest soloist Hilary Hahn. This performance will be available next week online to watch. Marie-Helene Bernard is the president and CEO of the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra since 2015. Prior to that, she was the executive director of the Handel and Haydn Society of Boston. She held positions at the Philadelphia and Cleveland Orchestra, and she began her management career in 1996 after winning a fellowship with the League of American Orchestras. Before joining the orchestra business, she practiced corporate and tax law in Canada. She is a Quebec native and holds both a law degree and a degree in arts management. She serves on numerous awards, was awarded an A-list arts leader by St. Louis Magazine, and was named one of the most influential business women in 2016 by the St. Louis Business Journal. going to, I think, mute you all because I think that the echo might be coming online.
Yeah, they muted themselves.
Okay, thanks. And next, Deborah Borda is the CEO of the New York Philharmonic, returning to the position after serving in that role in the 1990s. She was the CEO of the LA Philharmonic for 17 years, and during her tenure, the orchestra thrived through her work to build and launch Walt Disney Hall, spearheading the appointment of music director Gustavo Dudamel, and growing the budget and earned revenue of the LA Philharmonic dramatically during her tenure. And this is just naming a few of the highlights of her work in Los Angeles. She also held top posts at the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and the Detroit Symphony. She was the first arts executive to join Harvard University's Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership as a Hauser Leader in Residence. She was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2018 and was named a Woman of Influence by the New York Business Journal. Her groundbreaking work in New York includes the launch of Project 19, the single largest women-only commissioning initiative in history, and bringing the New York Phil to the community through various high-profile initiatives, and of course, most importantly, creating a plan and a timeline for the renovation of David Geffen Hall. Tomorrow, we will hear from Deborah Borda as she is receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award as part of this conference. So we're thrilled to have her here with us today. And finally, Chad Smith is the CEO of the LA Philharmonic since 2019. Prior to that, he was the COO from 2015 through 2019, overseeing programming, marketing, public relations, learning initiatives, and concert operations. Earlier, he held the post of VP of Artistic Planning, where he collaborated with music director Gustavo Dudamel and was integral to the creation of YOLA, the Youth Orchestra and Education Program that has transformed the schools in LA. He began his career in 2000 at the New World Symphony, working closely with conductor Michael Tilson Thomas. He's a trustee of the New England Conservatory. He's on the advisory board of the American Academy of the West and is a member of the executive committee for Avery Fisher Artistic Program. While he was a COO of the LA Phil, he held the position of artistic director of the Ojai Music Festival. He's known for his groundbreaking artistic initiatives from new orchestral series, multidisciplinary projects, creations of festivals, and his commitment to contemporary composers and music. Thank you all for being here today. You are among the most busy executives in this industry, and we're so appreciative that you took the time to be here as part of this session. So I will now let you know, all the audience know what's going on. We have some members of the public in the room. We have Marin Alsep and me in the room, and then we have everybody else online, including Deborah, Chad, and Marie-Helene in their respective cities. So far the technology is working. We're feeling good about this, and we're gonna start our chat. So Deborah, you're on the hot seat first. As a trailblazer and leader of numerous orchestras in the country, what is the most dramatic and impactful pre-COVID change in the industry?
Oh, she's muted.
Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
How about that? I have to unmute myself. That's not a rare thing. You know, in thinking about this question, Kim, I thought, I know this might seem a little retro, but I thought it might be useful to consider some critical events that took place before any of the people in this chat room or attending, were in the business. And so let's rewind the video to the 60s, when there was a major change in American orchestras in that the larger orchestras were able to, and partly with the help of the Ford Foundation at the time, by the way, negotiate year-round contracts that actually provided a living wage for musicians and fair employment, so that a music director couldn't decide they didn't like the shirt somebody wore and they were gone the next day. And there were real abuses in those days, which, you know, really it's very much protected against now. But this was a critical difference, because it also gave the musicians in that time, they gained and were able to utilize really much greater muscle in terms of the economics of what was going to happen and their working conditions. And so that was a major, major change, which really at that time led to, I would say, you know, the larger orchestras really sort of being in a world very much by themselves, and smaller orchestras having much more difficulty in competing. And the picture has changed as we've gone on. The other thing was in the 70s and 80s, gender equity actually took place in orchestras. I remember as a kid, when I first went to the New York Philharmonic, there wasn't a woman on the stage. And finally, the first woman made it into the Philharmonic in the, you know, Orrin O'Brien in the late 60s. And, you know, we see now that we have orchestras that are very much, you know, 50-50 in terms of gender equity. I will say, however, that in terms of the administrations of orchestras, that really, although it is radically changing now, really women didn't move into the CEO roles until the 90s. And then it's sort of moved in through then. But up until that time, when I went to run the New York Philharmonic, I was the first woman to do so. And that was back in 92. And it was, you know, it was different. It was considered newsworthy, actually. Today would not mean anything. So I think it's interesting to think back and set ourselves in what, you know, we always stand on the shoulders of the people who went before us, but to see how this is built. But today, sitting here today and thinking about all of our lives and our institutions, for me, there are two very clear changes. One is the impact of technology. It really touches on every aspect of our industry, of what we do, of how we make music, how we broadcast concerts, how we sell tickets, how we raise money, how we have now discovered through programs like Testator, we actually should coordinate, because a patron and a ticket buyer can be the same thing. How do we keep track of that? Our websites, absolutely critical. That was something people didn't have, you know, a decade ago. How we organize our administrations. What are the jobs that need to be filled out as a result of this? How do we run them, basically without paper? And in the past months, how do we live on Zoom? We don't even have offices anymore, most of us. So, and another question that I think is really fascinating is the constant pressure from our boards, and to a certain extent from the musicians, about how we can monetize our streaming efforts and all of the creative efforts that we're putting forth right now, especially in terms of this COVID crisis. And can we actually monetize that? Or is it actually going to be a development tool where we cultivate streamers and get them to buy tickets? And then finally, I guess that the playing field is sort of leveled, because the entrepreneurial spirit, in a sense, can be occupied by smaller orchestras, sometimes more creatively and with more flexibility and with greater agility than the big orchestras. So to me, you know, I'm not a tech expert, but I know how my life has changed, and I think all of us. So the next thing is, and I'll just talk about this briefly and then let other people talk, is that I think we have all seen, and not just because of the murder of George Floyd, but a new vision developing in the past 5 years, 6 years, driving the orchestra world, a vision of social equity, a vision of thinking about what can DEI mean to us, and how can our orchestras look more like what most of our communities look like? How can we collaborate? How can we lead in collaborating and bring more people into or go out so that we're in a larger community? And I guess for me, the final thing I really worry about and try to put thought into is, how can we affect long-term change in our institutions, and not just, you know, after, you know, put up with something on our website, Black Lives Matter, and it's got to be a much deeper systemic change. So I would say that was a long answer, but those are the things that I see right now: technology, social justice, but look at the whole parade of what is happening to our industry.
Thank you, Deborah. That's very thought-provoking, and I'm sure that we'll be coming back to talk about a lot of that in more detail in a few minutes. But I'd like to ask Marion a question. Marion, you're representing the conducting world today, and as you do every day for that matter, but in this room is what I meant. And we would love to hear about how your early history allowed you to become this internationally renowned conductor, and what were the pivotal moments, and when did you know this was it for you?
Well, I knew that I wanted to be a conductor from the time I was 9 years old, and my dad took me to a New York Philharmonic concert, actually, and I saw this guy conducting who was having so much fun, and people were yelling at me because I was having too much fun playing the violin. But when I saw him, I thought, oh, if I'm the conductor, I can jump around and nobody will yell at me. So that guy was Leonard Bernstein, and I decided that day that I wanted to be a conductor, and I really never changed my mind, not for a second. Of course, I really want to start by saying that I don't know Marie-Helene yet, but two very, very important people who have supported me in my career are on that screen, Deborah Borda especially, and Chad as well, throughout my career, because of course there are wonderful signs right now, particularly when I look at my assistant conductor this week here in Dallas, and when I look at your history of assistant conductors here in Dallas, that women, we've passed that tipping point where there will, I don't think anyone will be able to backtrack anymore from women on the podium. And this is a very exciting aspect for me. I'm absolutely thrilled. I couldn't be happier. During my development as a conductor, it really wasn't the situation at all. And I have to say that it was the mentorship that I had and the support I had from Deborah, of course, and from Bernstein, who was one of my biggest fans and supporters. He just believed in me so much. And you know, as I entered the field, I thought, oh, there's going to be a lot of women coming in now. You know, it's just inevitable. And, you know, 5 years passed, and 10 years passed, and 15 years passed, and 20 years passed. So I was like, okay, this is not good. So I decided that I needed to try to impact the landscape for the future of women on the podium. So in 2002, I started a fellowship for women conductors called, at that time it was called the Taki Concordia. Mr. Taki was my non-musical mentor, and I wanted to thank him. And Concordia was the first orchestra I started. But I think we have a couple slides if you want to see a couple of stats from it. But when, oh, maybe not. That's all right too. Technology is always tricky.
Yeah, I don't know.
And it's really not important. You know, slideshows are never very good anyway. But I have some of my vacation if you'd like to see.
No, we do have it.
That's all right
there.
though. It really doesn't matter. The over the period of almost 20 years now, 18 years, we've had 24 recipients, and 18 of the women are now music directors or chief conductors, and they represent 17 different nationalities. And during COVID, we were able to start a community. We met almost weekly or twice weekly often. And I think this idea of, you know, I'm referring to what Deborah was talking about this idea of diversifying our field for the long run. I think it's about creating a culture that is committed to change and committed to supporting each other. And that's what we have through the Taki Fellowship, which we try to open the doors to all women. But I really believe that this concept of diversity, we need to push it to the same point now as where women have arrived on the podiums. But I do want to mention that when I stepped down as music director of the Baltimore Symphony, this is my last season, when I stepped down, there will no longer be a woman at the helm of a major US orchestra. Actually, there will be no American at the helm of a U.S. orchestra, major U.S. orchestra. And this distresses me because I am concerned that women are allowed to a certain point, and then there's a ceiling. But I know with support from people like we see on the screen that we can move through to the top level, and that's what I'm hoping we see very soon.
Thank you, Marion, and sorry to let you down with the slides. We'll try to get them.
No, I
for you.
had a feeling a slideshow was not going to go over well, so I'm good on that.
So good thing we're among friends here. So Chad, I'd love to ask you a question. As someone who has now and has had for a long time tremendous artistic and leadership influence, what is your role in being an advocate and ally of women in the business? And obviously Marion touched on it, but it goes well beyond her experience with you.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for the question. And I'm delighted to be on this panel with all of you. Marion, I remember so fondly kind of the first project we did when we did Mass back at the Hollywood Bowl in 2004. And I literally would not be sitting in this seat except for my 15 years of working for Deborah Borda. It is impossible for me to kind of separate kind of my leadership from the time I spent working very closely with her. Recognize that a lot of what I'm going to say could be a shared conversation that Deborah and I could have because our histories are so shared. But first and foremost, I think what we have recognized is that all of these issues, women on the podium, a broad representation on our stages across many ethnic and racial divides is a systemic issue. And a systemic issue requires a systemic response. And I think part of what we're hearing, and you're hearing from Marion and certainly have heard from Deborah, is that there have been responses within our industry here and there have been pockets of good work. But what we have not seen is the industry as a whole systemically say, we all have to work together to support this, and we all have a role to play. And I think that was very clear to us in Los Angeles. That it was probably about 10 or 12 years ago. There was a real kind of moment of reflection where, as an institution, we tried to take a look at who we were. And looking at our primary constituencies. We looked at our board, we looked at our staff, we looked at the artists that were performing on our stages, we looked at our orchestra, we looked at our audiences, and we said, kind of, who are we and who do we serve? And there was a big disconnect between those populations and the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles, which is why we were uniquely constituted. We were there to provide a service to this place. And I would say that the first act, and the first and most important act, was just that recognition. And that recognition that there was a huge disconnect that we had to address. So I think at that time, we tried to understand, we tried not to determine what the outcome would be. We knew what the issues were, but we wanted to design a process that would affect an outcome that we hoped would come into being. And we recognized that there was that the process that we were using to try and kind of impact change in our industry was antiquated, right? We were depending upon the big artist agencies to put together lists that included diverse conductors and women conductors, and that wasn't happening necessarily. We were depending upon the publishers to put together composers that were broadly representative of the world of music, and that wasn't happening. And we recognized that we had to take a step on our own. We had to do the work. And I remember this, Deborah, I think you said that we just have to do the work. And that work was, all right, if we're not getting this information, if we're not seeing those candidates out there, then let's us put together our own bit of research. We set aside kind of research time too. And I remember this project very clearly. About 10 years ago, we had a researcher on our artistic team just scour websites across the world just to see who the women conductors were that we didn't know. And we put together a list of close to 200 or 300 conductors. And 95% of them we didn't know, and we realized that was our failing. That they're there. We just weren't seeing them. We weren't going to listen to them. They weren't being supported by the big agencies and the recording agencies. So we had to do that ourselves. And in order to do that, we put together a series of programs that tried to support opportunities within our orchestra. And that was our fellowship program for conductors, now called the Dudamel Fellowship. It was resident fellows program within our orchestra, the way that we've commissioned. And it's made a change. I think over the past 10 years, in 2000, or actually even in the past kind of 5 or 6 years, in 2015, about 6% of the guest conductors that were hired by the LA Philharmonic were women. In 2020, that number is 30%. We still have a long way to go, right? But now 30% of the guest conductors that we hire are women. And a similar assessment was done of all of our populations, our audiences, the artists that we're putting on the stage. And we realized that we had big blind spots. And so we had to address that also from leadership. And so we put in place kind of a diverse leadership team on the artistic leadership team, led, of course, by Gustavo Dudamel. And the change is happening. Now, change is not happening as quickly as it probably needs to. And we certainly felt that this summer when so many of our legacy institutions were really held to account for the work that has come in the past 100 years, or in the New York Philharmonic's case, 160 years, right? But change is happening. We just have to put better processes in place to affect the outcome that we all know we need.
Thank you, Chad. Very important topic. And again, I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But I would like to shift to Marie-Helene for a moment. And Marie-Helene, you were a lawyer. You have a really interesting background. What made you want to do this for a living? It's not the easiest job in the world, that's for sure. We all know that, especially now. And what was your path to get here?
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for inviting me. I'm already very inspired by contributions by my colleagues today. My path was indeed a little unusual. I grew up in a family of musicians who were instrumental in reviving early music in North America. So my uncle probably trained most American and Canadian organists past a certain generation. So I grew up surrounded with musicians and music, and I thought it was a natural thing until I realized it was not. And I think over the years, after practicing tax law for many years, which I loved, I was passionate, felt this pull, this kind of need to support artists and music, and to mostly connect artists and music to communities. I think it's a calling in a strange way. That was 25 years ago, when there were very little ways in terms of developing a career in orchestra management, none in Canada at the time. So my first entry into the field was in '96 with the League of American Orchestra through their training program. And one of my first orchestras was the New York Phil, and Deborah was CEO at the time of the New York Phil. So I was extraordinarily fortunate to first meet her and right away get totally immersed in the strategy of artistic programming and leadership, and really deep questions about the role of orchestras in communities. And after that, I was very fortunate work in Philadelphia with Joe Kluger and Cleveland with Tom Morris. And over the years, really, I think had the best schooling in orchestra management, working with the finest leaders and brains, and later got my first opportunity with David Hislop as a headhunter, giving me my first job. But truly the thread through all of this is music, and essentially my deep belief that connecting artists to the communities was instrumental to my work, because I guess I had seen them struggle so much, and musicians as entrepreneurs, musicians as creators, and yet this great difficulty they had to make a living. And I think later on it brought me to work in the field and bring my passion and my legal and business background in service. And it's truly in service to the community of orchestras, because nonprofit management, as you say, is hard work.
Thank you, Marie-Helene. Deborah, you've talked about, I'm going to shift to the pandemic for a few minutes because obviously with numbers going up around the world and in probably most of our cities, I'm curious about, you talked about the pandemic as a marathon, not a sprint. So what are your thoughts about arts reemergence and the New York Phil's reemergence and all of the orchestras reemerging from the pandemic?
I think all of us can think back to whatever the date was, and it was similar for all of us. The last concert the New York Philharmonic played was on March the 10th. And I had been sitting there for a few nights before and just seeing our audience dwindle. So it was less and less, and we knew that it just simply wasn't safe to continue. So what was interesting, I think, and I wonder, and I'll be interested what other people thought about this, but we really thought it would only be for a month or two. So phase one, sort of the adrenaline kicked in and we had to cancel a lot of concerts, all of the communications required with ticket holders, dealing with the orchestra. We had to work from home. All of us sent our staffs home and suddenly started living on Zoom. And it was a remarkable kind of sea change for everybody. So that was phase one, but we were going. It was a hot moment. Phase two was realization. For me, at least, that this car ride was going to be a lot longer. You know, maybe I thought we were driving to Boston, but we were driving to Saskatchewan or something. It was just going to be much different. So all of us, and this happened to everybody, I think we canceled more concerts. Many of us had to cancel a season. In some places, you could continue to play with audiences. We couldn't get more than 10 people together in a room in New York. And we had to renegotiate our CBAs with the orchestras, which was never an easy thing to do. But I think the wonderful part in this moment was creativity began to kick in as I looked across the country on what people were doing to think about how they could keep themselves relevant and stay in touch with audiences. And was really, it was a moment, a brilliant moment, a bright moment for orchestras. But now we're in phase three. It's sort of the long-term impact of what will happen. Permanent staff layoffs. Our staff is we have laid off half of our staff at the New York Philharmonic. The realization of what the financial impact will be, so new long-range plans. But I think it's now this critical moment of thinking about, will our audiences come back? Can we take really the thousands and thousands of people who showed interest and streamed, tuned into streaming, although they didn't pay. Can we cultivate them to become a new audience? What will our programs be like? So this is a moment, this is an opportunity for us, not for us, it's an opportunity that will be necessary for us to rethink so many different aspects of what we do and how we do it. And I guess the big difference is when you do a sprint, and not that I do a sprint or a marathon, but I think it's very high adrenaline. It's a short-term sprint. There's a lot of pain for a few moments and then it's over. And so you probably have a little micro strategy to win. This is going to take a lot longer. So it uses very different muscles. It's about endurance. It's about a creative strategy. And it's about how we transform ourselves in this time. Do we use it as an opportunity? And everybody throws the word transformation around. So I felt trite as I said it. But in fact, can we do that? So that's what I meant by the difference between a sprint and a marathon. And I am very embarrassed about something. I was just reading about this the other day, and the person who invented whether it's a sprint or a marathon was Dr. Phil. So I was quoting Dr. Phil, and I'm humiliated.
Well, it worked for you, Deborah. That's all I can say.
Well, at my age, you have to do a marathon. You sort of move along. Sprinting's out of the question.
Deborah, it's so interesting to hear you say that, and you and I have talked about this a lot. I think it's what's also fascinating about this period is that as institutions, we tend to kind of focus on incremental change, right? We tend to kind of move our ships rather slowly. Like, we know the issues are coming. We know that our audiences are not, our subscriptions are going down. We've known that for decades, right? That there's subscription decline. We know that we have to be more innovative in the media space and that we are behind there. We know that we have to kind of have greater representation on our stages. We've known that for a long time. And we know that we have to reevaluate and reconsider our meaningful relationships with our communities. We've known this for a long, long time. And what's happening now is that I feel like COVID-19, in addition to just being this, shock to our system. And as you described, these three phases are so real. It's also like it's not about incremental change anymore. We have to address media. We have to address kind of the DEI issues. We have to kind of consider that the subscription model is basically going to decline so quickly after 18 months of not giving concerts. And we have to consider that these our legacy institutions that have aggregated resources for so long have to reconsider how we show value to our community. And so I feel like this pandemic has just like accelerated that conversation by, in a way that we have been unable to probably as an industry for many, many years.
Yeah, that's
But I think that it's an interesting point because, I've been, I'm Darwinian in many sense. I'm not a creationist. And I think I believed, very deeply that we are evolving and that orchestras have evolved. And I mean, I think about these, I think you've put it very well. I think about these issues now because how we affect change that holds, that sticks, that's what I'm struggling with. And yet we're going to have to figure new pathways out.
Yeah.
You're right.
Marie-Helene, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just going to add that this crisis, as Chad said, triggered change that we were preparing for years. But as you said, so what kept us back? As an industry, we think the evolution of orchestras, I mean, we're dinosaurs still. I mean, when you think about the progress we've made over years and what keeps us back, because in St. Louis, what we do very well is connect to your community. There's been extraordinarily feedback and programs and connections in the community that we've made since the beginning of this pandemic in ways that we never expected. And so how do you sustain that? But also what else needs to happen in order for us to truly see that evolution of orchestras? It's amazing, just the exploration of repertoire that we're doing right now, that things we haven't played ever or in decades, and composers. I mean, LA, you've had a very long history of remarkable creativity in that arena, but still I can't fix the past, I can only improve the future, but we can't wait longer, right? We have to take risk, and as institutions, the fear of the risk management is really, really hard. And for reasons you all know, the extraordinary high fixed cost and the rigidity of our infrastructure, and how do you engage a board in truly taking that risk and leading an organization forward it's a fascinating work. But I know that at this point in our lives, we can't wait further. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens next.
So I'd love to hear from Maren. She actually conducted in Europe over the summer, I think, or early fall. And also
I did a Mahler 5 a couple weeks ago, believe it or not.
So we
Wow.
hear about that, and also the philosophy of meaning more to your community than just the concert series you put on, because I think you in Baltimore have succeeded at that, where we all have a little more work to do, perhaps.
But I think what all the panelists are saying is so important to really consider, all of us who are involved in this industry. I mean, it's been an elitist industry ever since I was a kid. Nothing really dramatically changed. I mean, I think we made incremental progress in spite of ourselves. Not intentional necessarily, maybe with your institutions, but the ones I've been involved with, it really was an unintentional byproduct, accidental, instead of intentional change. And I think this crisis has provided, in some ways, the first real daylight, at least in my estimation, of a sea change. But I don't see enough pushing through the clouds to get there still. I mean, I think this is the moment to change the entire landscape. I mean, look, I'm not an administrator or manager, so I don't have the kind of knowledge that you have. But to me, the fact that there's a price point and people who don't have money cannot access concerts, there's the fact that kids in West Baltimore can't afford a musical instrument or a lesson. You know, there's such inequality that we have to address that's societal too. I mean, it's just a minor representation. So look, you're the brains behind this, all of you, and you will bring that to the front. But, you know, we don't have that kind of depth of talent throughout the field. So many orchestras don't have people like you at the helm. And I think they're struggling for direction. And I think we need to set an example now of really breaking through, not just kind of, you know, okay, we'll do a little bit of this here and we'll move that around. And as soon as we can, we'll run back to the system and sustain the old system. I think it's time to really break down the walls and do something completely different. You know, when I started the Orchids program in Baltimore in 2008, I really didn't have any support for the program. And I used my MacArthur money to start the program. And I started with 30 first graders. And today we have 2,000 kids. And they're all African-American and Hispanic kids in West and East Baltimore. And they're amazing, these kids. And I say, look, we have these kids now. Now put in place a system where they can move through the system, even if it's a different kind of system from the one we have. But, you know, for me, it's hard without that kind of administrative support and vision. And that doesn't occur in every orchestra, but, you know, we have to, the musicians are starting to let themselves dream again. They're starting to be inventive. They're starting to let go, be more creative. And I think we need to jump on this and figure out how to, but I'm all about breaking down the walls because what the hell? So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Round of applause in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in this country, it is so different in every city. So Marie Helene in our orchestra in Dallas can perform. Marion's going to Houston next. They can perform. The Utah Symphony's performing. There's a handful who are permitted to perform and have an audience. And then in LA, New York, Boston, et cetera, it's not even possible. So it's not something that you can.
But can I say one other thing? That, I mean, the thing I've noticed in Vienna is that there's a different valuation of art. That art is essential to every person's life. I mean, you know, it's just a different equation. So the concerts are packed. I mean, as packed as they can be with some distancing, and the musicians are tested and they're committed to making music, so they don't really particularly distance. I have two on a stand. I mean, we're a little bit separated, but you know, there's a different kind of embrace. I mean, the fact that some major cities can open bars, but aren't having concerts, I'm like missing that. You know, for me, that's a little bit of a disconnect. So, but it's about valuing art. But we have to go back to the fundamentals so that we open the doors wide, so that everybody can be a participant, and so that they start to value art as well.
Don't you think, Maren, that it's sort of, I mean, you know, you're lucky enough to be working in Europe now, but one of the things that strikes me and has been not improved in the past decade or more is the complete absence of the discussion of art and culture in central discourse of the citizenry. The question of the arts or an arts strategy or commitment was the furthest thing that just wasn't raised at any of the previous elections. I mean, this one you could say, okay, this was sort of an anomaly, but somehow because we are termed elite, and elite is bad right now, elite is not good. Somehow we have been positioned, and partly by our own doing. Much of what we're accused of is absolutely true. But I just, you know, I wonder what you think about this. You know, music directors, when when, Kuzovitsky was in Boston and Zell and, you lived in Baltimore, but, what are the steps that you think we can take to, engender some discussion of this? Because it's frightening to me.
No, Deborah, of course, as always, you're spot on. I do hope you'll be considering running for the presidency when it opens up again, because that's.
I'm wearing my white jacket.
No, I noticed. I think that we need advocacy at the highest level. We need people to care about art. But it's more than art. We need people to care about the imagination of our children. And that's what's lacking in our educational system, in my opinion. And we need advocates for every child. In some ways, I wish we could disband the private school system in the United States so that we could create great public schools like Finland did. They didn't set out to make great schools. They set out to make equal education for everyone. It sort of starts for me at a very fundamental level. And when I see the kids in the Orchids program who are, they're more comfortable at the hall than I am. They own it, because they've been around and they're comfortable improvising and they're comfortable standing up and playing and it's about getting to these kids. That's my thing. And of course, as you say, setting an example at the highest level that it's valued.
Mm-hmm. And I think, learning as a value, it's not encouraged. Just the basic joy of learning. If we institutions and leaders continue to foster that, we do this in St. Louis, and it's transformative for kids, for adults. What joy! Every day I come to work for an orchestra, and I can say I learn something new every day. That's what makes life so interesting.
Well, I think I'm going to shift now and take some questions from the audience, and we'll spread them around. So I'll start with the audience in the room. If anyone here has a question, and I know we do have some questions online as well. So anyone in the room want to be the first brave soul to ask a question? Go ahead.
Well, I was curious about, as you know, COVID impacted the economy as a whole. A lot of businesses shuttered their doors, a lot of people laid off, and some of those jobs aren't coming back. Is the music going to be still the same effect? I saw the symphony this afternoon was kind of like half the size. Are we going to see, is that going to be the new normal, or are there orchestras actually going to shutter their doors?
I think the panel should really, you have much more knowledge of this than I do. I think something important to know is that there's a limitation on how many people can attend an event. So that's why the audience was very small today, or relatively small. But I'm sure that there will be major shifts in the industry. I defer to my colleagues who know much more than I on this.
Were you all able to hear that question? Okay.
Not so
I could not.
So the question is, with COVID-19 and the effect that it's had on a lot of industries in America where jobs are being eliminated and they're not going to come back. After the gentleman who asked the question saw the audience size today, which is very small, 150 people, he's wondering if that's going to happen to us. Are we going to be able to sustain the future with orchestras and reduced audience sizes, for whether it's because it takes us a long time to build the audience back, or because people decide to do something else, or they're scared, or whatever. So I'll open that up. Chad, would you like to take the first pass at that question?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it's a great question, and I think our industry is experiencing kind of like such substantive change already, right? So all of our orchestras we're not doing what we were created to do right now. So at a very kind of basic level, our industry is fundamentally changed. But I also think that the other kind of parts of our business, the for-profit side of our business, the talent agencies, in the past 6 months, we've seen the 3 largest talent agencies shutter, right? So we have seen a recording industry, which was once incredibly robust, basically kind of shut down. in many ways, the responsibility that existed in some of those for-profit sides of our business is now transferred to us. We are forced to become media companies. We are forced to become recording companies. We are forced to become organizations that support the growth and advancement of talent from the very earliest stages through all career stages. We have to do that as institutions. We have to make those choices. But I think the other part of the question was really interesting. Are we going to kind of come out on the other side? The short answer is yes, but we're going to be very, very different. And if we're not going to survive. We can't, I don't see us going back to the business model that any of us had prior to COVID-19. The economic tail on this for all of us, and even those of us who are these big, large legacy institutions, is going to be fundamentally changed. The question is, how quickly can we adapt? How good are we at predicting the right choices with limited resources? Where are we focusing that change? And how are our audiences and our donors and our constituencies that we support going to continue to care about us in the way that we will need them to? One, on a positive side, I think, the media thing is going to be a big benefit to us. One thing that I'm loving right now is that I'm kind of a data hound. I love data. And we have more data right now because of our media work and our streaming than we've ever had. We know what our audiences are responding to. We know what they like and what they don't like. We know how long they are choosing to watch these things that we're putting out. We know what age they are. We know what zip codes they're coming from. It is fascinating. We have more data now about how people engage with us than we probably ever have. So that's a positive change, which I think that we can use as we come out of this.
I think I agree with all of that, but I mean, just to go to something that we have to fundamentally consider, and I'm sorry if this sounds very bricks and mortar-ish, but the economic models as they were set up, they cannot continue in the way that they are. If you have orchestras that were, heavily reliant on ticket sales in their concert halls, and so we're going to, I mean, one of the moments I talked about before about how we can monetize, the streaming and the different activities we're undertaking. And that's a real question. Can we take those people who were streaming and watching things, and can we cultivate them the way we cultivate donors and bring them in? But can we transform them from people who are receiving, all of the free product that's out there now to people who want to experience it in person, and at what price level? Because right now, one of our big orchestras, what the price of just a decent ticket is. It's not easily accessible. So I think nobody likes to hear this, but one of the issues that is just we're going to be forced to confront is the economic modeling of what we're doing.
Helen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I echo what Chad and Deborah are saying, but I think also the question of very long-term investments in St. Louis. We have built an endowment that which draw covers a third of our budget, and we know that the future is in philanthropy, and it's that connection to what funders want to see and how they see the role of this orchestra in the community. So we've been very successful in that space, but as they both said, when you think of acquiring new audiences and sharing the creative process and outcome, it's what is tomorrow, we have no idea. I'm a little skeptical about how when it comes to monetization of media activities, how much we're going to be able to do, but it's part of the problematic is right now it's not one thing, it's like this amazing infrastructure we have that we have to revisit entirely, starting with the people, with the resources, the talent, and the financial model that we've been built around. So that's interesting years to come for sure.
Thank you.
The monetization is fascinating, right? Because we just haven't figured it out. I think we just haven't figured it out because what we can't do is expect that people will pay for essentially kind of a second-class experience for what they could get in the concert hall. right? So if what we're doing is putting out kind of media work that is just a reproduction online of what happens on the concert hall stage, then we have to expect that that is either kind of a lifeline to another point when we get back to the business model being fundamentally about the live experience, or we have to use this moment to innovate in that media space to create an artistic product which is different and is unique to this experience.
Mhm.
That is valued differently, right? And so I think, and I echoed Deborah's comments. I think one of the most fascinating things, I was on a lot of these are AXO. Out in California, there's a group of orchestras that are just the California orchestras. And some of these small orchestras, less than $1 million budgets, are doing some fascinatingly experimental work.
Yeah.
And it's because kind of interestingly, the media landscape has kind of leveled the playing field during this time. And that's something that inspires me. It also terrifies me, right? Like as big institutions, we have to be, when it comes to media, we have to be looking over our shoulder at kind of these smaller organizations who are using this moment to innovate in a fundamental way. And we have to kind of make sure that we stay as innovative as large institutions as they are.
That's what I was thinking, their ability to be nimble and creative right now, when we sort of move along in a stately fashion, it's the balance is changing. I interrupted Maren. I think she was going to say.
No, I was just saying, just playing on what Chad's saying, that this is the moment to finally open the doors wide and become and enable people to feel an ownership and a closeness and an understanding. The whole goal prior to this time was to keep the keyhole small, keep a distance, the mystery. And now we have the chance to really say, hey, this is how it works. This is what we're doing. This is why we love it. This is why when people talk to me about just, doing concerts online, I have almost no interest in this, because it's a shadow of what was. If you want to talk to me about placing a camera inside the orchestra so that I could talk to them about what it's like to be in the oboe section or in the violin section, and we could start to really understand what making music and how that resonates in the broader society about getting along, about listening to each other, about resolving conflict, then I think we have something going, and I'm up for it if anybody else is.
Great. Oh, I know we have a couple online questions.
Yeah, I'm gonna just come up close because this is the microphone. So can you guys hear me?
They do.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Okay, so we have a ton of activity online right now. We have almost 100 people streaming in, and we've got like 8 questions. I know we don't have time for all of them. One that came up that I thought was really pertinent for this panel was to Deborah and Maren. I haven't seen a lot of women take principal chairs in major symphonies. What is your opinion on this, and how can we make that change?
Deborah, you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think we have achieved gender equity. That's true in terms of most orchestras where it's at least 50-50. I think at the New York Philharmonic, it's probably about 30% of the women principals are women. And it's hard work. But I mean, I'll tell you what's worse than that. You look at the New York Philharmonic, we have a single African American in the orchestra, a single one person. So, I think women are making great strides. And I mean, I'm just so delighted that, we've finally seen them on the podium, their music performed. And I guess to me, that's not as pressing a problem as this other issue, which is just really affects me so much. I know, Maren, what do you think? You have to sit on audition committees.
I mean, I think that we still, we still suffer from stereotyping and inherent prejudices, sort of archetypal images of what, the principal trumpet looks like, or the principal trombone, or, these kinds of things. But I do think that diversifying our workforce on stage so that our orchestras reflect the communities we inhabit is a priority. But, you know, I guess I'm slightly heartbroken that we can't continue to focus on women because we're always marginalized. We're always like, okay, you got enough. Now you go. You know, I feel like, okay, but let's keep pushing I know you are, and I know you will, but please keep pushing forward, because I don't want to see women again having to take the backseat to another you know, cause, which is to me equally important, of course. But let's try to have parallel agenda at the same time, and I think we can do that. But the issue of diversity goes much deeper. It's not just a matter of an attitude. It's a matter of cultivating the youngsters so that they have the prowess to and the desire to become part of this institution. And they have to have the desire to become part of an institution that really has not wanted them. And this is something we have to overcome. It's a cultural issue, I believe.
You know, there's another aspect of it, and I'd be interested in what Maria Lynn and Chad think about it, which is the way we audition, the way we select members of the orchestra, even if there's a screen or not. It's sort of who goes higher, faster, louder that day. It's a very set kind of, you know, pathway that is a very narrow kind of decision making. And what we don't even generally get to do, although increasingly people are starting to think about this, we don't get to speak to the person. We don't get to talk to them and say, you know, what are your other musical interests? What else will you bring to this orchestra? What do you think about teaching? What do you think about, you know, various forms of you know, outreach in the community? What kind of a person are you? You know, we do this when we interview, hopefully we do this when we interview people for staff or people for the board. But if we could just not be so narrow in our definitions or in our process, because we're in a lockbox right now about it. And it's so important. I think that would be one way of breaking out, you know, to look at the larger picture, because by the time somebody gets to the finals at a you know, 400 people apply at the major orchestras in St. Louis or LA or New York. And when you get down to those 5 finalists, they're all fantastic. They're great players. They're very accomplished musicians. And it's a larger question than that. And I think to go back, because believe me, Marion, the last thing I want to do is say, forget about women. They've had enough. They're doing great. You know, it's an ongoing battle. But I think if we could change the concept of how we approach this, that would make an enormous difference.
Yeah, very true. And the way we recruit members of our administration as well. You know, we often look for people who come from the industry, and it's important, obviously, for some key positions, but how refreshing to bring people from other industries to inform ways that we can continue to evolve as orchestras in different ways. I think that's very important to enrich the thinking about, you know, how do you change our model and you know, Chad, you're
I think about pathways a lot, right? So, and I know that we're almost at the end of time here, but I think about pathways a lot, and I think about, again, these are systemic issues that require a systemic response, and we are the system, right? Mm-hmm. The orchestras, large and small, are the system. The music schools, large and small, are the system. The agencies, the publishing, we are all a part of the system, and we all have to kind of use this moment to collaborate together to support kind of the development of composers and performers from communities of color from very early ages up to the point of winning jobs in the top orchestras. We have to. And I think that, I think about your work, Marin, with Orc Kids, right? 2,000 kids in Baltimore are playing instruments who probably wouldn't otherwise be playing instruments. I think in our work with Yola, which is Gustavo's program, it's now 13 years old. It's 1,500 kids a year who get 18 hours of instruction a week for 44 weeks and go on tours and all of these things. The opportunity is there, but how do we work as a system to ensure that when they graduate as 18-year-olds, there are pathways for them to great music schools? And then how do we ensure that all orchestras have opportunities for residency programs to kind of give kind of these talented musicians opportunities to play in a great orchestra to win the great jobs.
Mhm.
So it is I think it is incumbent upon all of us to understand our part in the system, identify the gaps in the system, and then work together to bridge those gaps. And it's going to be a long process. And I don't think that anyone expects that this is going to kind of turn overnight. But putting together the program and the processes to address it is something that where the imperative has never been greater.
But we often think about this, about what is the intersection between the artistic imperative and the social imperative. But something that I've noticed as we've been talking about this more and more, and has sort of gotten under my skin, and this is going to set me up, which is when we're talking about why we can't have more people of color, why we can't have more equity, et cetera. What is the word that comes up? Oh, we can't do that. There's no pipeline. And so what I'd like to say is, what can we think about outside of this blaming the pipeline? We've been saying that since when? How many years have we said, oh, it's the pipeline, there isn't a pipeline there? And it's true, actually there isn't. But can we find other ways now of addressing this? Because it's a long, yes, you're right, we've got to be in it for the long haul, Chad, but what are we going to do in the meantime? Because the long-term solutions are going to take years to play out. And this pipeline is being constantly now thrown in my face. We don't have the pipeline. There's no pipeline.
But Deborah, I think there is, right? It's just that we haven't connected it, right? The Sphinx organization has been doing this work for 20 years, right? And you started Yola with Gustavo in 2007, right? Orchids has been around for that same. There is this work. There are these programs across the country. How do we kind of like incentivize our music schools to create space? What kind of partnerships do we provide? So I think we just have to be more active about it.
Yeah, you're right, because they're gonna have to be those steps, because I just don't think we can use that as the excuse anymore.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Sphinx has done amazing work. Other places have done great work, but it's thinking now, as we talked about, they're going to be changing. Is this a moment to seize and make some kind of intermediate steps, which in the long run will push us further along?
Right.
But don't you think, Deborah, that we have a responsibility as the artists on stage also to open our arms and embrace young people, even if their level falls a little bit short of those, rigorous auditions? Isn't there a way to create, apprenticeships for these young musicians? Everything can't be about perfection. Things have to, at some point, also be about humanity. I mean, to me anyway.
But I'm going to use two words which have now become sort of, it's not in anymore, but it's, which is, look at what affirmative action in higher education did in terms of giving people a hand up and in saying, we're going to, the way we measure people is by a very sort of post-colonial standard of the standardized testing. And in fact, there are all sorts of other aspects to it. And look at how that has changed the face of important academic institutions in the country. Not enough, but we have been absolutely unwilling and unable to embrace that.
That's my point exactly. Yep.
Well, this has been a fascinating and really important discussion, and I can see you're also passionate about this because we went 7 minutes over just for that one question. But I think it was a really good conversation to have, and it doesn't end here, but we will have to end our session. So thank you, Chad, Marie-Helene, Deborah, Marion. It was a true pleasure and honor to be with you today. And we look forward to seeing you, Deborah, for sure tomorrow, and others hopefully during the week.
I better be there tomorrow, huh?
All right, thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
A lot of stuff to talk about.